17 after 9 o'clock. Welcome to the second hour of News and Views on Salam Media. And this is when we welcome our Polokwane listeners to the show as well on One Nation FM. Our next guest on the show is David van Wyk. He is a mining expert with the Benchmarks Foundation, and we are going to be looking at raw materials for a green future. For whom and at what cost? We look at issues around sovereignty, democracy, and obviously justice for all. David, long time no speak. A very good morning to you. Welcome. Nice to be talking with you again.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. And yes, it's a very important topic that you wish to discuss.
Just for perhaps our first-time viewers or listeners, give us a brief overview of what exactly the Benchmark Foundation is all about.
Okay, the Benchmarks Foundation is about corporate responsibility and ethical investment. And we work all over South Africa, Southern Africa, and we've done some work even in Colombia, in Latin America. And our concern is with the extractive industry, specifically because it's so dominant in the African context and also in the South African context. So we are looking at what happens when multinational corporations come into Africa and what they are up to when they are here, and whether they are responsible or not responsible, whether Africans benefit or do not benefit from their activities. And we've written about 15, 16 reports in the last 20 years looking at mining in Zambia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, South Africa, and like I've said, in Colombia, in Latin America. And our reports are critical. They are pro-community, they are pro-poor. They are pro-Africa. What we have seen over the period of colonialism and post-colonialism is the exploitation of Africa and its people rather than the development of Africa and its people. So our reports find massive evidence of environmental destruction, of cultural and indigenous knowledge destruction, and of basically poverty resulting from mining instead of development resulting from mining.
So, David, these reports that you prepare, are they then given to the governments of the said countries? Or are they given to these mining companies, and who then holds them accountable regarding reparation? That's the big issue here, is it not?
In the South African context, we give our reports to the presidency, we give our reports to the Department of Mineral Resources, we give our reports to the Human Rights Commission, we give them to the Department of the Environment, Water Affairs, Sanitation. All the relevant departments that we do mention in the reports get copies of the reports, as well as the mining companies. We do give the mining companies copies of the reports about a month before publication, and for them to comment. Not that we will change the report on the basis of their comments, but we will publish their comments. Very often the mining companies respond in great anger to the reports, but eventually they then come around to say, well, what can we do about it? And they admit that they do have problems. We also send it to the Minerals Council or Chamber of Mines. In South Africa, it's now called the Minerals Council. In other countries, it's still called the Chamber of Mines. But we also validate our reports with the communities that we work with, because we feel that it's their voice that needs to be heard in all of this. Mining companies have access to absolutely billions of rands to advertise themselves and to promote themselves and to produce very glossy reports and things like that. But very often those reports are not honest, and they are just mere advertising tools rather than dealing with the issues that they should be dealing with.
The recent issues that erupted here in Rivoli, west of Johannesburg recently, regarding the Zamazama activities, not only in Rivoli, but all along that mining belt, starting, I think, in the East Rand, on the East Rand, going all the way down to Carltonville. We know it's a huge problem regarding illegal Zamazama activity. This is a direct result of the mining companies not having closed off with due diligence. Would I be correct in that statement?
Well, I think that you are very correct. Mining companies have abandoned 6,000 mines in South Africa, and more mines are in the process of being abandoned as we speak. It is illegal to abandon a mine, but there seems to be very little that the government can do to stop mines from being abandoned, mainly because these are multinational corporations and their directors and shareholders and so on are global. They are not necessarily local. However, the law does require that mining companies contribute to a mine closure fund where there's some 50 billion rands available for mine closure in that particular fund, but it's not nearly enough. We estimate that it would cost around 250 billion rands to just do the repairs that have been done as a result of the 6,000 abandoned mines that we do have. But we also note that South Africa locked in its neighbors as labor sending areas into a migrant labor system during colonialism and apartheid, and that these countries around South Africa could not develop because their human resources were trapped in South African mines. And now that the mines are closing and being abandoned, tens of thousands of workers are being retrenched. And very often these workers come back and they simply form informal settlements on the mines. This is also partly due to the living out allowance of mining companies that they give mine workers to find their own accommodation around mines, that these informal settlements erupt everywhere. And so you have a long belt of informal settlements all the way from the East Rand through to Carltonville, Klerksdorp, and Potchefstroom. And these informal settlements is where these small-scale artisanal miners or unregulated miners actually operate. Very often these mine workers don't get their pensions, they don't get their dues when they are retrenched. And people in Lesotho and other places tell us that they come back to South Africa to come and collect their pensions, so to speak, through illegal mining.
What a sad state of affairs. On the one hand, you have local communities who are up in arms regarding this illegal activity happening on in their backyards, and wanting these Zamazamas to find or go back to where they come from, because they, just adding to all the woes of the locals regarding water, electricity, etc., etc. But when you look at the situation as you've sketched it about the situation of the Zamazamas, you can't help but realize just how an exploited group of people they have been by these rich multinationals. How do you see this being resolved amicably? And I do know we were going to be talking about raw materials for a green future, but it does in fact tap into what I have just brought up, does it not?
Well, it does. If we look at these old mine sites, these 6,000 abandoned mines, most mines had incredible facilities and infrastructure that they constructed for the extraction of the minerals. So they had housing stock, they had training facilities, they often had hospitals and clinics, they had sport and recreation facilities, all of which have gone to waste, which if these mines were closed down properly, those facilities could have been made available to local communities for their development. Also, Benchmarks is suggesting that, instead of mines just closing and walking away from their responsibilities, the government actually does an audit of all existing mines and repurpose and re-engineer them for the purpose of being used by local communities for local development. And that can include, for example, generating electricity from ultra-deep level mines, where you can generate electricity through geothermal electricity generation, because ultra deep level mines are very hot underneath, and that heat can be used to to run generators to generate electricity. Or you could turn the mine wasteland where you've had all this toxic mine waste being dumped into solar farms, for example, because each mine had an electricity substation that supplied it with electricity. The same substation can be utilized to feed electricity back into the national grid, for example, which is a creative way of looking at mine closure and seeing how you can use the infrastructure that is there for the benefit of the country, which hasn't happened. And that infrastructure has been largely plundered, which is a very sad reality that we are sitting with. And that when we're talking about alternative energy, these mines could have played a very positive role if we actually re-engineered and repurposed them. In the Free State, for example, the mines are full of gas. They're full of gas that can be used and extracted also with regard to alternative energy. They could be repurposed for that purpose. But it's a very sad state of affairs in South Africa because we are now shifting mining to the Northern Cape, where we've got 90% of the world's manganese. And manganese is a critical element in the production of batteries. And we are exporting all of 90% of our manganese. We are exporting instead of adding value to it, manufacturing batteries in South Africa, manufacturing alternative energy technology inside South Africa, using the competitive advantage we have of having all this manganese here. Instead, we are shipping it all off to the harbors on the East Coast, to Europe and to China and to India and everywhere else, except utilizing it in our own context.
Okay, we're going to go for an ad break, and when we come back, we're going to be looking at what is the 2023 Concept Note to Benchmarks Foundation Conference. We're going to be asking the questions: raw materials for a green future, for whom, at what cost, given the scenario we've just discussed regarding Zamazamas here in Johannesburg or Gauteng. Is it a similar situation that's going to play out going into the future? You're talking about mining activity, obviously in the Northern Cape. That is also a worrying concern. So let's unpack all of that when we come back from our ad break. Thank you indeed for your patience.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media, your humanitarian broadcaster.
For a long time, we've lived in a centralized world where institutions held the all-important data and confirmed all transactions. Those times are over. Welcome to Libertas Group, a blockchain development company boasting an ecosystem that continually redefines the way we do business. Our blockchain is decentralized, making it immune to hacking or alteration, putting the power back in your hands with no middleman so you can focus on the growth of your business. Libertas, the simplest investment choice you'll make.
When you give water, you're reaching out to drought-affected areas, bringing them to life. Fresh water to drink, to clean, and to grow. That's the power of water. Donate now to Islamic Relief.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists, with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities, conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Help us ease the hunger burdens of those in need by donating to the SANZAF Meals Project. For just 12 Rand, you can provide a freshly prepared meal to an individual. And with your commitment to a monthly contribution, we can reach out to even more communities and deserving individuals. Call us on 011-834-6046 to learn more about this life-changing initiative. SANZAF, changing lives through development and relief.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media. Humanity sets the agenda.
Welcome back. It's exactly 8:32 a.m. I'm talking with mining expert with the Benchmarks Foundation, David van Wyk. And earlier on, we touched on the issue of illegal mining and the Zamazamas and the disruption where Zamazamas are working in the community, starting on the East Rand, ending obviously in the Far West Rand. We have been obviously subject to all of this over the past few weeks. Things have gotten quiet now, but undoubtedly that matter is going to flare up again, once again, because I'm hearing from my producer who lives in the area in Riverlea that the operations, the Zamazama operation, hasn't stopped. But let's move on then, and we're going to talk about the Benchmarks Foundation conference entitled Raw Materials for a Green Future. For whom, at what cost? Sovereignty, democracy, and justice for all. Welcome back, David van Wyk. Talk to us about the importance of this this conference, because we know as humans we need raw materials to ensure our needs and our survival. But of course, this is also driven by motives of profit, greed, I guess a whole host of those issues. And as far as big mining houses and corporates are concerned, anything and everything they look at it regarding with the eye of profitability and bottom line. How do you see it, and what do you believe this conference is actually going to target, and are people going to sit up and listen?
Well, I think that first and foremost, we note a number of coups that took place in West Africa recently, in Mali and other places, Niger and Burkina Faso. Those coups were essentially military coups that took place on the grounds that the populations in those countries are dissatisfied with the manner in which their minerals are being extracted by France and the little benefit that they are getting from it, from that extraction process. Basically, big French multinational corporations operated there and extracted the minerals. Many of these operations have been to Burkina Faso. I've done workshops there and so on. The mining company has its own airport. It doesn't even use the national airport to fly out whatever minerals it processed inside Burkina Faso without even declaring to the Burkina Faso government what it's flying out. And this has been the story of Africa. Africa is the most mineral-rich continent on the planet. It actually has provided the foundation for Western industrialization in Europe and North America and so on the basis of African minerals, but also on the basis of African cheap labor. And the multinational corporations all derive their roots from colonialism. The Dutch East India Company, the British East Africa Company, the British South African Company, and so on. These companies were all basically mining-oriented companies, closely tied in with Anglo-American and De Beers and so on. And so what you've had in Africa is the immense production of wealth, which has not benefited Africa, but which has benefited colonial powers, and of course Europe and North America in the post-colonial era. And basically African people are becoming fed up with this situation where we are producing the wealth that the industrialization of Europe and North America is based on. We are not actually getting much of the benefit from that process. Yes, indeed, everything that I have in my house is related to mining and extraction. My car, my television set, my appliances, the materials used in the construction of the house and so on. Mining is incredibly important, but irresponsible mining is incredibly destructive. It destroys the river systems, it destroys the ecology, it destroys the broad environment, but it also destroys near mine communities. With the influx of labor into an area where there is mining, you have increases in HIV/AIDS, sexually transmitted diseases. You have increases in poverty. People lose their access to the land, their ability to cultivate the land and feed themselves and so on. And they become dependent on mining. The destruction, particularly of women, and the role of women as breadwinners and people who put food on the table in their households in traditional self-sustaining society collapses, and women are reduced to sex work and so on in order to be able to feed their families and so on. And so when we talk about mining, we note its importance, but we also note its destructive nature if it is just merely profit driven, and if it's not socially accountable and socially responsible. And South Africa has tried to make mining companies socially accountable and responsible through the mining charter and through our laws, and also through the insistence that there must be social and labor plans in each operation where they are operating, and ensuring that there are environmental impact assessments and environmental management plans. But the big corporations simply do a tick box approach to these legal requirements, and in the end they do more harm than what they do good here. Of course, they do immense amount of good in Europe, and they do immense amount of good in North America, and recently also in China and in India and so on. But Africa always gets the short end of the stick. And if we look at the job creation resulting from mining, when we had the 2009 financial crisis, the British Parliament sent a delegation to Benchmarks to find out from us how mining and the collapse of the global economy in 2009, the financial crisis, is going to affect job creation from mining in Britain. And we realized then that our mines create more jobs in the Northern Hemisphere than in the global South. And this also is a huge problem. We are trapped into a global economy where we are the suppliers of cheap labor and minerals and raw materials, and we don't seem to be able to dig ourselves out of that position.
Sadly, that is our reality. We hope and pray that these issues are going to be brought up at the Benchmarks Foundation conference. Can you quickly tell us about the Critical Raw Materials Act, and how is that going to impact favorably or unfavorably as far as the whole mining scenario is concerned in Africa?
Well, what we have seen in China and in India is that they have identified strategic minerals which they then refuse to export, or they put very high tariffs on the export of those particular minerals, because those minerals are essential to their industrialization and economic development. We should really be doing the same. We should not be wholesale exporting manganese, vanadium, and other critical minerals in this country. We should actually protect those minerals. However, those minerals will not be beneficiated so long as they are under the control of multinational corporations, and those multinational corporations are not interested in beneficiating those minerals, because they say, we are mining companies, we are not manufacturing companies. So unless South Africa actually creates the manufacturing capacity inside South Africa and also in the rest of Africa that could actually add value to these minerals, then that act will not actually have much of an impact.
Okay, to wrap up very, very quickly then, who is going to be attending this conference?
The Department of Mineral Resources, we've invited other government officials, we've invited Chapter 9 institutions, we've invited communities, we've invited mining companies, and we've invited academics and also the diplomatic community, the Canadians, the Australians, and others, who are, Canada is the biggest source of big multinational corporations operating in mining in Africa at the moment. People all look towards the Chinese, but it's not the Chinese who are doing most of the mining. It's Canada that's doing most of the mining in Africa. Very few people actually realize this. But also these mining companies are so interrelated with each other that the Canadians mine here, but they export to China, or they export to North America and Europe and so on. So much so that there are platinum mountains of platinum in Switzerland, for example. And in 2020, Britain was the biggest exporter of platinum in the world, but there's not a single platinum mine in Britain itself. So you ask yourself, how does this come about, and how does this benefit or undermine Africa, in fact, which is what it does. Britain's also the biggest exporter of partially processed raw diamonds, but they don't have a single diamond mine. We talk about Israel. Almost 50% of its economy is financed by African diamonds, and the processing of African diamonds. And when we talk about, for example, blood diamonds, we have to ask ourselves how much of that revenue that Israel generates actually goes towards the oppression of Palestinians. So all these things are interlinked, and we really have to understand that to work out a way in which Africa can actually benefit from its own minerals and raw materials.
David, that's where we're going to have to leave it. And what I would like to, in a future program, talk to you about in detail is the whole scenario regarding blood diamonds. But we have run out of time. Wonderful talking with you. Good luck. Keep up the great work regarding, bringing all of these very integral, important issues to world leaders and also to the people on the ground, because most times they're not even aware of the impact on their very lives, their health, and future generations in the areas that they live in. So thank you, God bless, and take care.
Thank you so much, and you be well.
The time is 9:43. Standing by to talk with us is our next guest, Daneo Baloyi, and she too has an amazing story to share with us.